Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, the Data Dialogue with Talha Khan. Earlier we talked about introduction to data analysis, Power BI, and now we're going to talk about SQL. So this entire training session is in different. It's targeted towards different concepts and different technologies. We'll be talking about data analysis, about different BI tools, about SQL. Then later we'll be talking about introduction to data science, ETL, database operations, modeling, not modeling, as in database modeling, and then ETL, some data engineering concepts, and so on. But we'll be taking all of these different concepts in a course of different sessions. So we had two sessions for Power BI. We'll probably have two or three sessions for SQL and databases, and then multiple sessions for ETL and so on. So without wasting further time, let's get going. Data dialogue is a data journey that I'm starting for all of you and with all of you, so I could share different data reading material, some articles, blogs, and tips and tricks. Rap is where I work as a senior data analyst right now in Dubai, and it's an amazing company. And yeah, so let's get going. So we already have talked about data, Power BI, all of this. So I'll just continue from where we left previously, right? So this is about introduction to SQL, but for you to understand SQL, you first need to understand what are databases, because SQL is just a structured query language. But what is it performed on? What kind of tools you need to perform that? What are the basic concepts before you jump into SQL? I've seen a lot of you and a lot of people, even me including, when I started data journey, I just jumped directly into SQL without understanding what's a database, what's even data. So it's really important for us to understand the basic concepts before we jump into SQL or even into Python or anything at all. That's something which cannot be replaced by some practice. You just need to know that knowledge, that foundational layer of knowledge before you jump into this. So that's why most of this session will be towards creating that foundational knowledge and information. So what's a database? Database is basically a collection of related information. Why I say related, I'll talk about that later, but it's basically a database of collection of information or even data. Information might not even be the right word, it's just data, and we extract information from that data, right? What we talked previously in the previous sessions. Now, any collection of related information or data is a database. For example, the phone book that you have people's name there, you have their phone numbers, even maybe their email addresses. So that's a database. The shopping list you create by hand on a paper when you're going to shop for something or get some groceries. That's also a database. It has some data and is stored in some place, so that is a database. Your to-do list as well. If you just work every morning, if you have anything to do and you just create a to-do list with check marks, that's also a database. Similarly, the LinkedIn user base, the comments that you have on your social media post, your five favorite foods. If I ask you to list down your five favorite foods, that's also database, right? So database is not just what we see all for example, SQL databases, then we see Azure databases, MySQL, Postgres. Those are also types of databases. A database in general could be anything wherever your information is stored. So now database can be stored in different ways. It could be on paper as we just discussed. It could be this PowerPoint as well. It's a collection of information or collection of data on this particular PowerPoint. So it's a database. The comment section of this live stream right now, and on a computer, which is something we think of whenever we say database. That's a type of storage of a database, and probably the best one as well. For data analysis, that's the only one we can rely on. Also ledgers, if you remember, like in past times, especially in my country where I come from, Pakistan. So whenever you go to any government office or a police station, right, they open these huge pile of notebooks and these ledgers where they have hundreds of thousands of pages and they're just entering everything manually. That's also database. All that time logs that they have, the employee records that they have, the police complaints that they have, physically written in notebooks, that's also a database. So I'll just give you an example of computer database versus not on paper, and I'll take example of Amazon. So now, what's an Amazon database, and what does Amazon do in terms of data? It keeps tracks of all the products, the reviews that there are on those products, your order history, your credit card information, your address, your past addresses, your multiple credit cards, and all of that, even your wish lists, right? It has not billions, not millions, trillions of pieces of information. that are stored and need to be readily available not only for the customers but for the platform, which is Amazon itself, to perform its operation. Now all these data points, all this data is really important for Amazon to function. Without this data, Amazon can't even function, right? It's entirely based on this. And one more factor is security. Now Amazon can't just have all this data written somewhere and lying somewhere around for anyone to access. I can't see your credit card, you can't see my credit card. That has to be secured. So security is really essential for Amazon's database, because there is personal information. And all of this data is stored where? On a computer, on some physical hardware or a server. That's it exists physically. I mean, the computer exists physically, and on that computer this data is stored. Now, if you look at a shopping list, what does that do? You can just create a shopping list to keep a track of the products that you need to purchase when you're going to have a monthly grocery or a quarterly grocery shopping. You can have 10 to 20 pieces of information on that page at max, or maybe even 30 if your handwriting is really small. Security is not important. Don't care if someone else gets a hold of that. It's not going to leak any information. They're not going to use that against you, or they're not going to sell that to someone, right? And again, if you lose this, if you don't have this, it will not affect your ability to shop. You can still go, you can still shop, you can still do what you went out to do. And it can be stored on a piece of paper or even on your mind. That's also uh, what do you call it? That's also database. I'm just hiding this. So computers are, in my opinion, and also in general opinion and generally as a fact, they're great for storing databases and keeping track of large records and amounts of data, billions, trillions, gazillions, whatever that unit is. So they can store that data, and that's why whenever we talk about databases, we take them in the context of a computer and not some piece of paper or a book, or just writing on your hand. Now, what are database applications and where can you use them? For example, if you go to the bank, right, you or any banking application, whenever you log into your app, you have certain amount of information. You can do some transactions, you can send money, you can receive money. All of that, how do you think that happens? How do you think that record is stored or kept? There's a database behind that that's recording that information in each and every second and millisecond, so that whenever a transaction is made, or any action that a customer does, or any action internally the bank does, it's stored. Similarly, for airlines, the reservations, schedules, all of the information, that the bookings that you receive on your email, that data is stored on a physical computer somewhere on their hardware and in their database. Whenever in your universities, the grades that you get online on your portal, whenever you register online, that's also stored somewhere on the database. For sales, all the data related to your purchase, your history of purchase, your behavior, the products that you like, the way that you react with different websites, that's also stored. Similarly, for online retailers, for manufacturing, all this data around the world for each and every industry is stored somewhere in the database, right? And they use that information not only for marketing but also for their very essential and basic functionalities. For them to be able to function and exist, that data is very important and crucial. Similarly, for HR, your salaries, your tax deductions, your records, all of that is also stored in a database. So database can be very large with they can vary. They can be very small to very large, and they actually can touch all aspects of your life across different industries. Wherever you have interacted with, you've interacted with the banks, you've interacted with the businesses, you've interacted with the online retailers, with the booking platforms in university. All of that data actually connects to your personal life. So databases do touch all aspect of your lives and our lives. Now, what's a DBMS? Now you have a database. All right, cool. What now? What do we do with that? How do we use it? How do we make use of that database? Now, there's a thing called database management system. It's a software that allows you to access that data which is contained in that database that we're talking about, right? But it's not an actual database. DBMS is not a database. DBMS does not store data. It's used to manage that data, right? Now, what's the objective of DBMS? Is to make sure that you have a convenient and very efficient method of using that data. Now, that data could be, you could also store that data using DBMS. You could retrieve that data. You could manipulate that data, delete that data, perform certain number of operations on that data through this software system that we call DBMS. Now, it has a lot of benefits. It makes it so easy to manage all the large amounts of information you have. It can handle security. It can handle backup. So you always need to have backup in case something goes wrong, or your server goes down. You need to have backup. so that your information is not lost. Also, access management, you can't allow everyone to have information to each and every everyone to have access to each and every part of information. For example, in a company, different departments can only access certain type of information. So me in the data team, I can't access everyone's salaries, for example, right? So that's something which has to be confidential, and your DBMS helps you control all of that. It can also import export data. I think I quickly move to the next slide, but yeah. So CRUD, we also call that CRUD. What was that? Create, read, update, delete. Now these are four different functionalities that should be in each and every DBMS, right? So a DBMS should have the ability to create records or columns or tables, or maybe an entire database. It should have the ability to read the data that's already created and exists in that database. It should be able to update and manipulate that data. You should also have the ability to delete that data. So good DBM should have all these options, and whenever you're performing SQL, you do actually do perform all these options. You either create or read or update or delete. Now, what type of databases do we have? We have relational and we have non-relational, right? What's a relational database? Now, in relational database, data is stored in the form of tables. It could be one, it could be multiple, it could be million, billion, thousand. Billion is maybe way too exaggerated, but it can have as many tables as you want. And they and each of these tables has a column or multiple columns and a row or multiple rows. So rows, we will talk more about what exactly rows and records are. And there's a unique identifier for each and every row. So in one table, you can't have unique identifiers, similar unique identifiers for different rows. We'll also talk about this later in this presentation. Now, before I move to NoSQL, so in relational databases, all these tables are somehow connected to each other. So you you get pieces and snippets of information from this table, from that table, and then you combine that to get insights and to get into the nitty and gritty of the data. So that's why we say relational, because these tables have to be related through some keys, not guess keys, and we'll talk about these keys later in this presentation. What's a non-relational database? So non-relational database use and by the way, relational databases use SQL. Non-relational database use language is called NoSQL or not SQL. So non-relational databases, basically data is not stored in tables. It's stored in key value pairs or key value stores. Is stored in documents like JavaScript object notation, XML. Is stored in graphs. It can also be stored in a term which is called flexible tables. Now, in this presentation, I won't really in this session I won't really go into details of NoSQL or non-relational databases. I'll because if I'm thinking of most of you who have never been introduced to databases, so I want to keep this very short and just enough so that you can start learning SQL, at least some basics in this session. In the next session, we'll talk more about relational databases in detail, non-relational databases as well. So let me give you an example of relational database. You see, we have two tables. We also discussed these tables in our previous two sessions. So we have employees, right? So we have employees table, we have department table. Now, how are they relational? You can see that there's a person named John belonging to Department 1. Now, what the heck is Department 1? It's HR. So there's a relation between these two tables, and the relation is defined by these keys, by these identifiers, right? Now, that's why we see relational databases. Then what the heck is RDBMS? We talked about DBMS. Now, what's RDBMS? Now, it's basically relational database management system. So if you have a relational database, the software system that you use to manage that database is called RDBMS. And RDBMS, as I just mentioned, there are different types of RDBMS. So you might have heard the word of MySQL so many times, Oracle database or DBMS, PostgreSQL, Microsoft SQL Server, all of these are RDBMS. So they take care of your relational databases, and you can use these tools or these softwares to basically access your relational databases or create your relational databases and maintain them, manage them, do whatever you want with them for data, I mean. Then what is SQL? Well, SQL, the much awaited or much sought after language. SQL is the second most, by the way, SQL is the second most sought after language when it comes to data analyst or entry level data analyst jobs. The first is Excel, second is SQL, then there's Power BI and Tableau, and there's Python. So this is one of the most sought after job skills for entry level data analyst. And to be honest, this is something that you might have to use for the rest of your life as a data analyst, and it's an amazing language to know. So well, what is SQL that you keep hearing on LinkedIn or from on different, maybe if you hear podcasts or on these job descriptions or job requirements. Now we talked about RDBMS, right? Now what do RDBMS use? Now we know that it's a tool, all right. You can use this tool to access your relational database, but what language or what are you going to type on that to access that database? Now RDBMS use SQL, structured query language, to access that database in those relational tables. Now, before we move further, you might think, okay, what structure I understand, language I understand, but what is query? Query is any request that you make, or more like a question, right? Query literally means a question or a request or something that you want to understand or know. Whenever you search, type something on Google, it's also query that top five resources for learning SQL, or what is data dialog and why is Talha Khan so amazing. All of these things are queries that you type on Google. That's a query. Now, in terms of this data landscape, query a request made to your DBMS or RDBMS for specific information. So you write a query to get that information and then to understand what's happening in your data. And initially, queries are very simple and very easy to take care of. But as your database gets more complex, when I said you have, you could have hundreds of tables in a relational database, and then you need to get information from 20 of these tables. It gets really complex to create those queries to get some information from this table, and one from employees, then another from department, other one from, let's say, their salary, other one from their performance, then one KPIs, and so on and so forth. Now, SQL is, as I already mentioned, I'm just reiterating, so it's a standardized language for interacting with RDBMS. Now, what does it actually do? It helps you perform CRUD or CRUD operations, which is create, read, update, and delete. It also helps you perform administrative tasks like managing the accesses, creating backups, and taking care of security. You can create entire tables, not just add information or just retrieve information. You can create entire tables in a database. One thing you need to understand is that you can't use the same SQL syntax on each and every RDBMS. Now you might be wondering what syntax is. Basically the way your SQL or SQL is structured, the way you type it, right? So different RDBMS, for example, MySQL, Oracle, Microsoft, they have slight differences, not major, but very small differences in the way you type those. So it's not something that will really be difficult for you to understand, but you can just learn basic SQL or MySQL or Microsoft. You can then always translate that into the language of Oracle, for example, or for Postgres. The 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 main functions or the main statements are more or less the same. In some of them there are slight differences. So now SQL is basically a hybrid of four different languages, right? This DQL, which is called direct query language, it's used to query or request the database for information. And you can only get the information that already exists there, right? So information has to exist in the database for you to query that. So in SQL, we have select statements that get the information out of your databases. Then you have DDL, it's called data definition language. It helps you define different database schemas. For example, create, alter, drop, truncate, rename. Create will create a table, alter will change the table, drop will delete the table, truncate will, you know, truncate your table literally, rename will rename your table. DCL is data control language. It's used to control access in the database to different users. So you can give them permissions by using the grant function, or you can revoke their permissions if you feel that this certain table or database should not have access for a particular person. You can just revoke that. Then you have DML, data manipulation language, is basically used for inserting, updating, and deleting, or basically manipulating data in a database. So you have insert, you have delete, and you have update. Now, you might be thinking, what's different between delete and drop? So we use delete for a particular record. We use drop for entire table. All right. So moving further, what's happening? Yeah. So just a quick repack. Wow. Two pack. I love two pack, by the way. Database is any collection of related information. Computers are amazing for storing databases. DBMS is a software that you use to manage databases, and it allows you to perform cloud operations. We have relational, non-relation databases. And we have, for relation databases, we use RDBMS, which is just SQL in return to store data or to manipulate data or to use data in those columns and tables, columns and rows. And then you have non-relation databases where data is stored in format which is not tables like JSON, graphs, key value, etc. Now I've been mentioning tables, records, and all of that, but what is table, right? It's not the table that I have my monitor on right now. And for people, because the reason I'm talking about these basic concepts is because I know that in my audience there are people who have never been introduced to data or have never even used Excel. So what's a table? It's defined as a collection of rows and columns. What is a row? What is a column? Let's start with a column. Column are also called attributes. They're also called fields, and they're also called columns. So in Excel, basically they're the vertical ones. So if you have Excel, right, you'll see you have horizontal rows and your vertical rows where you vertical columns where you have A, B, C, D, E. So this vertical, let's say, it's literally a column, right? So if you have a building and there's a pillar, right, and or maybe when you're constructing something, we have different columns of different what do you call that? I forgot what you call that in. Uh, Different iron rods, right? So you create these columns, and in these columns you bind these iron rods, right? So it's literally a vertical column, which is also called attribute, or it's called a field that has more information about that table. And the rows, what are the rows? They're also called records. They're also called entries. So for each of these columns there's a horizontal entry, a record, or a row that basically stores these values of those attributes. So for example, if you look at this, we have employees table, right? So this employees table, you can see that this vertical is called columns, and this horizontal we call it rows. And this entire thing it's a combination of rows and columns, and it's a table. So if you only had this employee ID just one, it would be still one column and one row. It would still be a table, right? So now what are keys? Keys is a term you might have heard, and it's very important because when we say relational databases, keys are of paramount importance, right? Because without keys, you cannot have relationship between these different tables. So what basically is a key? It's an attribute. You know what we talked about attributes, right? Attribute is a column or a field which uniquely defines a row in a table. Now, focus on the word unique. It means that no two rows can have the same primary key, first of all. Secondly, only one table can only have one column as a primary key. So it's not like you can have two different columns, you can call them both primary keys. No, it just has to be one. And just as it has to be unique, it also cannot be null. There needs to be at least some value in that which is unique and which is not null. So look at this example again, employee table. So we have John, Sarah, John, Charlie, and Alice in different departments. So you see this employee ID, this is a primary key, right? And you can see how all of these are unique. One, two, three, four, five. None of them is repeating. There's no null over here. They're unique, so they're primary key. Now, if I tell you, hey, tell me who's the employee with key five, you can easily tell, all right, there's just one employee with key five. That's Alice, and she's in the data team. I like Alice because she's in data. Similarly, you can use any number to identify a particular employee using the primary key because it's a unique identifier. So now, if you might have noticed something interesting here, we have John in the HR, we have another John in the HR. They both are Johns, they both are in the HR, which is not something which is so uncommon. Similarly, in classes, you can have people with similar names in the same class. But how do you differ? How do you differentiate them? This is how you will differentiate them, by this primary key, because this is unique, right? Now, there could be another example. These are just numbers, but for examples, it could be your email addresses as primary keys because no two people can have same email address in the world. It could be your phone numbers because they're also unique, or your passport numbers because they're also unique. Now, I don't know if you have heard these terms, but there's a term which is called surrogate key. Well, now, what's a surrogate key? Now, if in this case, these employee IDs, they don't really mean anything in the real life, right? So in this life around us, these numbers don't mean anything. They're just some numbers that we're using to uniquely identify, but they have no real meaning and value around us in the world. So we call these kind of keys surrogate keys. Surrogate keys. And then we have these keys which actually have some real meaning around us. For example, your passport numbers, your phone numbers, your email addresses. We call them natural keys. So you can either have, if you don't have a natural key in your tables, you can always use, you can create different combination of keys to and call them surrogate keys. Now, this was primary key, right? I hope this is clear. Unique, not null, and just one per table. Then your foreign keys. Now, foreign keys is now you might have noticed how I've added s here for plural. I'll tell you why. Now, foreign key is a set of attributes in a table, right? That refers to primary key of another table. Let me explain that to you again using our favorite tables. And the reason I have S is because one table can have multiple foreign keys. For example, look at this. We have employees table, and we have employee ID over here. We have employee names over here. We have their department IDs over here. Then we have a department table where we have department ID and department name. So now, how would you now? All right, we know that. All right, fine. Let's assume that we didn't have this over here. There would be, and we had both these tables without this column. There would be no way to know which department all these employees belong to, right? And if you see this department ID, which exists in both the tables, here it's a primary key. It's unique, right? And you can see it's getting duplicated here, and we don't care because it's not in here. We have this as primary key, not this. You can have 1 million people with the same department ID, and we wouldn't care in this table. But in this, it has to be unique because one department can only have one ID, right? This is primary key, and now if you look at this, same ID is a part of this table as well, right? Now this primary key being in this table is called a foreign key, and only using this foreign key you can understand, all right, that John with the primary key 1 and foreign key 1 belongs to this department, because this primary key will or this foreign key helps you identify which department John belongs to in some other table. Similarly, we could have had, let's say, uh, let me give another example. We have department leads in this table. So in department table, I also want to know who is the lead of each department, right? So now this department lead again, you look at this. This is nothing but the employee ID, right? Now this employee ID is the primary key of this table, and now we're using employee ID in this table as a foreign key to understand who is the lead of each department. So for HR, we know it's five, it's Charlie. For IT, it's Bob. For finance, it's sorry, for IT it was Bob. For finance, it's Charlie. Yeah, whatever. Nah, I'm bad with numbers. No, I'm not. But anyways, I hope you get the point. So a primary key of one table can be a foreign key of another table. And why do we need foreign key in another table? To create that relationship between these tables. Now, there's one more thing which is called composite keys. What is composite keys? I won't get into that because I just want to at least start all of you and onboard you on SQL. But composite keys basically mean sometimes your primary keys, you don't have primary keys, let's say, or sometimes it's really hard in the table to already have a primary key, right? And it's very difficult to uniquely identify each and every record. So what you do is you create you combine different columns to create a composite keys. Composite means it's a composite, a combination of different set of columns until it's unique. So for example, this might not be the best example, but still, let's say, so I combine name plus department ID John 1. Now that could be a composite key because John is not unique, for example, but John 1 is unique, Sarah 2 is unique, Bob 3 is unique, just for example. So in certain cases, you might have so complex tables, you might have you wouldn't be able to identify them uniquely just by one column or two column or three. So you might have to use four columns to combine them in a way that now the combination of these four columns is unique. I hope this is making sense. Now we're just going to start SQL, but before that, let's talk about data types. Now, I talked about data types before as well when we were talking about Power BI and about in introduction to data analysis, but let's have a recap. But in the language of SQL, we have int. Int is integers, so it's whole numbers. Integers are basically whole numbers, or vice versa. It means you cannot have decimals, you cannot have point or anything like that, or a fraction. It has to be a whole number, whole number, not a whole. Then we have decimal or float. These are decimal numbers. So in different types of RDBMS, you might or SQL syntaxes, you might have to use float or decimal. Now this is a decimal or a float or a fraction. So let's say if you're talking about stuff like currencies, or like exchange rates, or stuff like temperature and all of that, or speed or mileage. Here we can use decimals, right? Or sales and all of that. So you might have been seeing this MNN. What MNN means? So whenever you're using these data types on SQL, you also have to define these data types, right? So what do you mean by MNN? M means the number of the digits before the decimal, comma n means the number of digits after decimal. So let's say if you want to create a table and you want to just specify that, hey, all my numbers will only be two digits and they can only have one decimal after one digit after decimal. So you will write 2 over here, comma 1 over here. You're like, no, I have really huge numbers. I'm recording sales data, so my numbers could be as much as in billions. So you're like, all right, I'll have 9 over here, and in decimals I want to be very precise, so I'll have 4 over here, for example. So you use this to specify the number of digits that you want. Then we have varchar. It is basically variable characters, and I've mentioned 32 here just to explain to you. Just you can just understand this as n. So this is 32, so it means string of text of length 32. Anything that's not numbers or dates, you can call them varchar. So varchar, you could have written here 1, so it means that in no condition in that column you can have a string of text of more than one character. Now, what's string? What's text? You know what's text? What is string? So whenever we are not talking about numbers, when we say text, we use a term called string in SQL or in Python in programming. So if it's not number, we say it's a string. Now, a string could be numbers plus it could be alphanumeric, right? You could have alphabets and you could have the numerals as well over here. For example, your passport numbers. So if you have so let's say if you're talking about someone's first and last names, right? So we know first name is not going to be more than 32 characters. But if you're talking about some diseases, we can say, all right, this disease has a huge name and this column can be specified by varchar 64. So you have to be very careful about these numbers when you're creating databases. If it's already created, you don't need to care about that. Blob basically means is binary large objects and stores large data. Then we have date format, which is year, month, date. Sorry, year. Then you have timestamp. In this, ignore this. There's a type over here. It should have been a hyphen. In this, apart from date, you also, in addition to date, you also have hour, minute, and second. So why do we need this? Sometimes when you really need very granular data to understand what happened across different hours in the same day, in different minutes, in different seconds. So you use this type of data, right? So when, let's say if you're talking about um, mm, 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 in oil and gas industry, right? If you're talking about different production throughput or temperature of your some particular cylinder or a shell, right? So you will talk in terms of minutes and seconds. Similarly, if you're talking about airline bookings, a million people across the world could book at the same time or in the same day. So you'll need to have those different timestamps to understand how the behavior or how the data was stored in that particular day. So it's all about granularity. What's granularity? Is the level of detail that you have in your database, right? So a granularity in terms of I'll just explain to you granularity in the context of dates. Now, one granularity is year. If you want to have very high level data, one level down would be quarter, then month, then week, then day, then hour, then minute, then second. So these all are different level of granularities, different level of details, right? So now we're going to start SQL and we're going to talk about this. We're going to create this very small table on SQL and perform just some basic operations on this to onboard you on that. Before that, I think what we should do is I should just tell you how to download SQL and all. Even though I already have SQL, but I'll just really quickly walk you through it. So what you need to do is you just need to uh, on just Google, just type my SQL community server, right? Just go to this link. You'll see two options. You can either download zip or installer, and just you download this installer. And this you just download this from here, right? If you have 32-bit, this is for Windows, by the way, and this is the also 32-bit. How come? Anyways, you can just download one of these, and when you download that, it'll get downloaded, of course. Just skip no thanks, just start my download. And since I already have this, I won't click on this. And then we are also going to download post pop SQL. Now, why you see free code camp? Because my entire this training session is inspired by code camp and Giraffe Academy. So what you need to do is you just need to wait a second. Let me remove this. You need to go here, click on get pop SQL, and need to download pop SQL here. You'll just download that. So once it downloads that, we'll go back to where's my download directory? Yeah. So I have them over here. I already have installed them, but I won't install them again. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you how to uh, configure them. So wait a second, it says yes. So this is MySQL installer. And so you see, I already have installed that. So I'll just click on first. So what you'll see first is this. When you see this, all you have to do is go to this MySQL server, click on this drop down 8.0, click on one of these, and just click on the right. It will add it over here. Similarly, just go to applications, MySQL shell, select one, and just click on this arrow. It will be added over here, and then you select this workbench. But I'd skip workbench for now if you're very beginner in this, because it gets complicated, right? And then once this is done, you'll get another screen, which will be this. So once you select all these, you go to next. It will download that. Once it's downloaded, it will talk about configuration. So just select this development computer, leave this everything as it is, leave the port as it is, click on next. It will ask you for password, so you'll say next. I'm using the password called password only, so password check. Wow, typo. Next. So just use this as it is. You can just choose to start when your system starts or no, and just click on next. And then when you click on execute, it will just download that. And as soon as this is done, it's all done, all good for me, it's done. Similarly for PubSQL, it's very straightforward. I'll just explain to you connection in PubSQL. As soon as it's done, what you need to do is you need to go to this over here, click on this MySQL command, MySQL command line, right? So enter your password. So my password was password, right? Now what I need to do is I need to now this is basically the terminal, the command line. You can run entire SQL just on this. You can run all your select statements, all your database operations on this itself. It's called the terminal. Or you could do it on MySQL Workbench, which I wouldn't recommend for beginners because it's really complicated. There's so many things you'll get overwhelmed. Or you could use PubSQL, which has a much user-friendly interface, and that's what I started with when I started learning SQL. It was really easy to understand. You don't have so many options. You don't have to get distracted by all those different functionalities. So once we create a database, we'll just move on to PubSQL. So you need to understand that for us to run SQL language to manipulate data or to run different kind of queries, we need to have a database in place. So first, what we'll do is we'll create database called, let's say, SQL training. Enter. It's here now. This I'll just minimize this. Now I'll open PubSQL. So you should remember that the name was SQL training. So I'll just go to um, connections, right? Add a new connection, MySQL, host name, just let's call it root. No, sorry, it's just local host. What's the name of database? It was SQL training, right? Password was, username was root, password was password, and just connect. Now it's connected, and now we can basically see, let's say if we just wanna, for example, wait a second, if we just wanna see show tables. So now we can just write show, control enter. We can see that this is the wrong database, and now you should be able to see that over here what we just added. I don't know why I can't see that right now. Just one second. I'll just go again to the file preferences, my my connections. I do have 3 connections, so I'll just click on this one again. Okay, sorry, my bad. So my this connection is selected, right? So I earlier, just before this, I created another one called the data dialog. I already have created that, so now the only that one is selected itself. You can just change any of these by clicking on them, but I will just select keep the data dialog because I like the name. So we have the data dialog over here, we have this connected, and now this is the editor where you can basically run all your queries to in short, just understand and to sorry, not to understand, you can run queries on your database. So what we discussed just now was that we'll create a table called employees, right? So no, sorry, students. So what we are going to do is we're just going to create this table, right? So with these 3 columns and these entries. So to create this, we'll run. If you remember, we just talked about different data types. Let me just pop that over real quick. So these are different data types that we talked about, right? Um, Here you go. So we have these data types over here. So we're gonna just use these real quick and to create the table. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open this. I'll create a table. So for create a table, we have a function in SQL. So SQL has different functions for each and every uh, action or functional or each and every action that you want to perform on the table. So what we'll do is we'll create, right? Create is what will create a table. Now you see I'm writing in capital because I'm used to it, but you don't really have to write in caps lock because it traditionally it used to be case sensitive, but I believe right now it's not case sensitive, so you can even write in small lowercase letters. But when you're creating the table, right, which is student, that you have to be careful about because whatever you type, it will be stored just as that. So if I type student, it will be stored as capital student. So I just want to have it lowercase, so I'll just create this table student. I'll open this. This is called parenthesis or whatever you write. It has to be inside this. This is the SQL syntax. I press enter and now I have to understand the field. So we said we have three fields. We have student ID, we have name, and we have major. So I want to call the student ID as student ID. And since we said that it has to be unique, it has to be a primary key, so we'll just call it integer. I don't want whole numbers of float over here. I just want integers. So when you're creating table, you have to define data type of each and every column, right? So student ID has to be an integer, a whole number, and it also has to be primary key. So I am specifying that, hey, I want my student ID to be primary key. Now this is one column. I press comma and I press enter. So now I'm separating these by commas. This is also part of SQL syntax. Then the next thing was name. Now name, I want variable character. So it's varchar. Now let's say it's 32 because I don't think anyone can have their name more than 32 characters. Or let's say, all right, if you're not separating by first and last name, let's make it 40, right? And then we have defined the data type over here, comma, then we'll define the major or the discipline. Discipline is very important for all of us to be disciplined. Again, let's just, for the sake of convenience, let's also make it 40. Now, since this is done, we don't need a comma over here because there's nothing after this. We only have three fields. In the end, I enter a semicolon because that's part of SQL syntax. You can do two things now. You can just select all of this, and there's a run on top over here. You can click on that run, or you can just select all of this and just click on control and enter. That's what I do. This rows affected 0. So now I want to see whether or not I have this. So I'll just write show tables. Employee is something that I created before. Ignore that. See, now we have a student table over here. So let's say I just do it again. It's giving me an error that student already exists. If you can see, oh, if you can see over here, right? Here it says student already exists. So we don't need to create that again. So we have student table. Now you want to see, so this show tables is used for that. There's another functionality called describe tables, right? So describe, write the table name. Now what this does is it will tell you all the data types that you have and all the columns that you have in that table. So if you see over here, right, if you see over here, it's telling you about different. So you have field, you have a type. This is the field that you have, the columns, the type, and the primary key. So you can see this student ID is defined as primary key because we did that, and it cannot be null. All right. All right. So we have done this over here. Now let's quickly add data into this, right? Because, well, this is just a table. It does not have any data. So let us add some data. All right. One more thing. Now we create a table. How to delete this table? So I'll just drop student. I'm not dropping a student. I'm dropping the student table because that's. So if I just click, if I have this and I just press Control Enter, oops, student, what happened over here? Sorry, I missed something. Drop table, right? Enter. Rows affected 0. Now if I say show tables, there's only employee. If I say describe student, it will say it does not exist. I'll just click go here and just control enter again. It's again created. You can see it over here. Right, it's again created again. So use drop table to delete a table. So whenever you're working on the live database, if you get an entry level job, please never use drop table. Never use drop table. You will create a whole mess for the company and yourself. It might be your last day. You can also alter the table. So let's say you now want to alter means change, right? So now we have three fields. You're like, man, I also want to have GPA. Well, it's important to have GPA, right? So I'll alter table. What is the table name? Student. What do you want to add? I want to add one more thing, which is called GPA column, and I want it to be decimal, and I want it to be 2 or 1, 1, because decimal can only have, let's say GPA can only have one digit before and two digits after. So I just create this and I press enter. It just happened. Is that a full stop? Yeah, perhaps this MySQL does not support that comma, the 1 2 thing. You can just mention decimal over here. So now you can see describe student, and you can see over here we again have this over here now, right? So we have student ID as well, and we have major, name, and GPA. So now let's move on, and now I just want to delete that again, or I don't want this for my analysis or from for this tutorial. So what I'll do, I'll again alter table student, and I'll drop column GPA. Now see, you might have noticed you don't need to mention add column, you just write add, but for dropping you have to write drop column, because drop in itself is for tables that we talked about, right? Drop tables, so you have to specify drop table, drop column. So now you can describe it again, and you can see there's no we don't have this anymore. All right, so now let's move on to adding some data into this, right? So we also need to add data into these to be able to do something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some data real quick, and I need to uh yeah, 1 second. So for adding, what you need to do is this is insert means add or insert into. Now where do you want to insert that? So you have to type this word into, which table is called student table. What are the values that you want to insert, right? So we are choosing insert into the table of student, and what are those values? Open parenthesis. Now you see I'll write in the same order of these columns that I created. So I know first was primary key, I want that to be 1 comma. Second was name, so the name should be Jack, or let's say Talha. Why Talha? Let's say Ronaldo, man. See, now you have to, in SQL you have to specify this in single quotation. I don't know what inverted commas, right? Or single inverted commas. So you can't just say Ronaldo. If it's a text, it has to be between these commas, inverted commas. You can't have them without that unless it's numbers. And then the third thing is major. So major could be biology, right? And then you just press this, press Control Enter. Rows affected 1. You can see over here. Now I can just go and I can use another statement which is called select. Now, what is select statement? Select statement is the most common and most important statement in SQL. Use select statement to show you data, or to give you data, or to return to you data. So telling SQL, hey, select all this, whatever conditions you mentioned, select all the data based on these conditions and show it to me or give it to me, right? So select from, I'll tell you what this asterisk means. Student. Now, what does this asterisk mean? It means select all columns from student table. So if you had 50 columns, it to select all. Or what you could do is you could just select the particular column and just select name only. Now you can see over here we just have name over here, right? Uh, as you can see, just Ronaldo, because I mentioned here that hey, only select the name and nothing else. And now what I say is select name and also select major. Control enter. Now you can see name and you can also see major, right? Now you also need to understand these things depend on the order that you write. It does not have to be in the order of the column or the table, but on the order that you mentioned there. So if I want to have major before the name, I can just write major, separate by comma, then name. So if you want to have 10 fields, just separate each and every by comma, control enter. Now you can see first we see major, then name, because now you're telling SQL DBMS, RDBMS in this case, which is MySQL using this pop SQL editor, that hey, show me the major first and then the name from the table student. And now that we only have one value, it's only showing one record. So but I just want all of them, so I'll just write this as static, which means select all, show all. So student ID, Ronaldo, and biology. So similarly, we'll add some more values here as well. Let's say what I'll do is I'll just copy paste this for, so values. Now this has to be 2. You know what, let me show you one thing. 1 again, right? I'll just add 1 again, and I'll say control enter. It will give me an error because it's a duplicate entry for primary key, and primary key cannot have duplicates, right? So it has to be 2. Let's call this gate. Let's call the major sociology. Control enter, then control V again, and then in this case we'll just change this to 3. Call him Jack, Jack, Hugh Jackman, and again biology, let's say. Now, for some people or students, you might not have their discipline. You might not want to add that. So how do you specify that? Because you don't have an option over here, right? You have to add all these 3. So what you can do is you can specify columns that you want to add the value. So I can say I just want to add the student ID, student ID. Oh man, what just happened? And I want to add the name. I don't want to add um, the major. So what I'll do is I'll just write over here mm, clear, and I don't want this. Oh yeah, sorry again, my bad. 4. Now if I go and select from student, you can see over here that with this we have clear and null because we have not added anything over here, right? And then let me add someone else as well. Control V, 5, and let's say Donald, not Trump. And control enter. So now we have this. You can see we have all these 5 values over here. You can just let me zoom in again. I wish this is the wrong zoom in. You can see it over here, right? So we have Ronaldo, K, Jack, Claire, and Donald. We have this. Now what we can do is we can introduce or we can update all of this, right? How about we update these? I don't want to have Ronaldo in my class because, well, it's Ronaldo. So what I can do is I can update some data, right? What I can do is I can just go over here and we'll just quickly finish this session real quick. So what we can do is um, we can do 2 things. Now we'll talk about updating and deleting, right? So we can either delete, let's say delete from, where do you want to delete it from? Because you can't, what if you have 20 tables? You have to specify the table. Delete from student, right? Oh, okay, now delete what from student? You need to specify what do you want to delete. I want to delete Ronaldo. Where student? Now I can, now what is where statement? Now where specifies the conditions. Now delete from student where, literally like in English, delete it from, or just go to the park, place this package where there is a bench, right? So you're telling someone about a condition to perform the action. Where student ID. Now what student ID for Ronaldo? It's 1, right? Control enter, and he's gone probably. So now you can just see Ronaldo is not there anymore, right? It's deleted. So I can just go again and just press control enter again, and then he will be there again. Is there again because I just press control enter. Now if you want to update something, so I don't want to delete, I just want to update. I want to update from student. In update, you don't say update from. Wait, what did I just type here? You say update student because you're not updating something. You're not selecting something from table. You're updating something in the table. So you say update student, update student, Set name. I want to set the name of that Ronaldo to change. So I want to call Ronaldo Tony. Student ID is equal to 1. So control enter. You will now just go and select from student, and here it is. See, Johnny. So this is basically very basic information about uh, SQL. So you can have a lot of more where conditions. For example, where student, not student ID. You can say where just select from student, right? And you can say where student ID is greater than 2. For example, it will give you all students where greater ID is greater than 2, or it's equal to or greater than 2, right? So it's wait, it's greater than or equal to 2. It's different for different. Yeah, so it's either 2, 3, 4, or so on. You can also limit this. You can limit, I only want to see 2 records at most. So you can limit that into 2. So you'll saying, hey, give me the records, but only limit that, right? Let's just remove this, and you can say, all right, just give me however you want to give me top 2. How do you want to get, and yeah, let's see, you wanna arrange them by descending order. So you can just say order by, right, the student ID ascending, because if you just say order by, they'll be arranged ascending in an ascending order. You have to specify descending. See, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But if you just say order by student ID, it already is ordered anyways. But see, it will just order by. You can also, it's already ordered in ascending. You can say name. It will be arranged in ascending order of their name, and so on. So these are basic SQL functions that you'll have to use. So you can create a table, you can update a table, drop delete a table, create records, update records, delete records, and then select those based on some conditions. So this is what we've learned today. I'm just considerate of the time. In the next session, mid next week probably, we'll start from here, and we'll talk into more details of different functions that are possible, and some constraints and all of that. So I hope this made sense initially for all of you. So just please download the SQL server, create this table, and then we can later in the next session talk, we can just pick it from there. And I just hope that you guys understood this. And yeah, I think that's it. So we'll have SQL part 2 next. Then we'll talk about databases, advanced and more data modeling, ETL, and data science foundation. In probably next couple of months, these all will be finished. As usual, I request you to please scan this and follow this page on Instagram. It's something which is really important and dear to me, so I will really appreciate. And once again, thank you so much, and assalamu alaikum and bye. See you soon, and please practice.